The first thing they tell every new intern at the Bureau of Impossible Coincidences is that the building smells like tunna and distant thunder, and that both scents are a useful gauge of how the day will go. I believed the first half like a fact that could be checked on a gusty morning. The second half sounded like a metaphor I would adopt out of politeness. I was, on that first morning, the sort of person who made lists of lists and put sticky notes on top of sticky notes. My mother had catalogued our lives as if we were a minor but thorough library. I arrived wearing a blazer 2 sizes too large because the thrift shop near my apartment had looked like the place where people recatalogue themselves, and because every intern handbook I'd received in my life advised looking competent until you were capable of being so. The entrance hall was precisely what you imagine when you combine the worst parts of municipal architecture with the oddly tender gestures of a conspiracy of civil servants who also happened to enjoy paper. The receptionist's smile was efficient and slightly mechanical, as if it had been practiced with a rubber stamp. There were brass signs everywhere: guidelines, additional guidelines, additional guidelines. A potted plant wore a tiny laminated sign, please try not to wilt. The air smelled of toner and rain that hadn't happened yet. I checked in, presented myself as August Finch. The name felt both too plain and alarmingly appropriate, and a woman in a blazer with pockets that were suspiciously deep handed me a badge. She did not say welcome, but she sighed in a way that meant the same thing in that office. Her badge was attached with a clip shaped like a quill. I clipped my badge to the oversized lapel of my blazer and tried to look as if I had expected my systems degree to one day lead to a job cataloging improbable events. Ms. Pemberley Ledger, everyone called Herms Ledger, but she always accepted the full surname as if it were itself a ledger that required balance, was waiting for me in a room that smelled faintly of old ledgers and citrus hand sanitizer. She had a ledger literally stitched into the lining of her coat. The ledger gave off a faint shush when she moved. If you were the sort of person who put your faith in the sedative power of procedure, Ms. Ledger might look like an anchor. She looked at me with what I first construed as a ledger-stitch glare, ink staining the tips of her fingers and a permanent crease of worry between her brows. "Meh, Finch," she said, and her voice was the kind of voice that could make a stapler feel forgiven. "The Bureau is not an office. It is a ritual with forms. We do not fix things by magic, Mr. Finch. We fix them with memos, signatures, and the occasional well-timed tea." She produced a cup of tea from somewhere within the extra pockets of her suit, as if it were a minor miracle. The cup was embossed with tiny stamps, each one a day that had not yet needed stamping. I wanted to say I had read the manual. I wanted to say that I had interned in quiet basements during college, where the smell of paper was a holy thing. Instead I said yes, ma'am, and then, because grammar can be a way to buy time, I added, "Does the tea help?" Ms. Ledger granted me a slow blink that might, in another life, have been called indulgent. Tea helps with ritual. It is a lubricant for signatures. It prevents ink from clumping into decisions. It also tastes like something that knows the secret timing of rain. She set down the cup and counted the paperclips on her desk, a nervous ritual, I later learned, the way some people picked at nail polish or hummed to themselves. She counted to 13 and then moved one clip to a new pile as if 13 were the old coin and 14 the new currency of the day. "You will see things here," she said. "You will see the unusual. If it can be stamped, it can be catalogued. If it cannot, you file a petition. If it ought not to have happened, submit Form 42B. She leaned forward and regarded my badge as if trying to read my career's fine print. Form 42B is banal. No intern has ever misplaced one. It is what you will use when a memory has been misallocated. Do not misplace it. The lunchtime seal is a thing, Mr. Finch. We will speak of it. It is not lunch exactly. It is a kinetic punctuation. By midday, the world expects us to have tied up our deviations. Please do not be the reason the city has to reprint its sunsets. When she said kinetic punctuation, I laughed for no better reason than nervousness, and because you sometimes have to signal to the people around you that you will perform your share of the absurd. Owen Marrow, who had been leaning against the doorway as if leaning were his job, gave a short, conspiratorial whistle at my forced giggle. Owen was the sort of man who had the face of someone who'd been let into a secret club and then set about installing a coffee machine. He had a tie with improbable constellations, as if whoever designed it had catalogued the positions of forgotten promises. He held a battered folder and his index card was smudged, not with guilt, but with deadlines. Ah, he said, as if everything could be improved with a well-placed staple. Another recruit straight from the tidy town. Don't worry, this place will loosen you up, or at least teach you a more entertaining kind of panic. He gave me a look that suggested he had once stapled his own joke to a memo and never regretted it. They handed me Form 42B like a minor relic. The paper was both ordinary and not. It had the right dryness, the small raised seal that only an experienced hand would notice, and a margin that insisted on being marginal. Someone somewhere had doodled a lobster in the top corner, but Ms. Ledger's eyebrow only flicked at it, and she said, "Fill it out with care. The language of a form is the language of reality as amended." It is a terrible thing to be given a relic and to feel your hands, those taxonomists' hands, the hands that liked indexes and tidy boxes, tremble. I sat at a desk that groaned with the memory of other people's petitions. The desk accepted my nervousness the way old wood accepts weather, quietly and with accumulation. The bullpen smelled like tonner and old apologies. There were cubicles decorated with tiny shrine-like arrangements of paper clips and charms. A pencil cup that had once belonged to a time fixer of the year, and a framed certificate that read in recognition of dedicated obscurity. People drifted by with trays of tea, with memos tucked under their chins like armor. A notice board read, "Lunch hour ritual at 12, be there with pens and patience." Someone had left a sticky note beneath it, "Or bring a brave sandwich." My sandwich was, in retrospect, a modest and dignified turkey on rye wrapped in the sort of wax paper that promises life will be ordinary. I had decided to eat it quietly at my desk, because the idea of performing ritual with seasoned veterans while I might still be in the process of making a catastrophic clerical error felt like asking to be publicly unmade. I unwrapped the sandwich and, in an act that was simultaneously practical and terrified, set Form 42B beside my plate. I do not know at what point the form and the sandwich began to conspire. I like to imagine there was a tiny, embarrassed collusion paper offering comfort, bread forgetting its place. What happened more prosaically was that I'll never be able to entirely blame buttered bread, a smudged stamp, a distracted hand, the way Ms. Ledger's demonstration of the proper fold had made me think of choreographies rather than chronology. I lifted the form to affix the departmental stamp, and the rubber wheel carried a faint smear of ink. An accident that felt then and now like a punctuation mark falling into the wrong sentence. I set Form 42B into the filing rail labeled recent and, by force of habit, slid it left as one does when one is sure of order. The rail was not orderly. It was an array of small disobediences, memos that hummed softly, a passport that kept winking at its owner. A weekend that seemed to be having a nervous breakdown in the corner. I pushed the form in between Tuesday and Wednesday slots without quite noticing that the label for Tuesday was slightly folded under, and that the Wednesday label bore a note in a hand that insisted on being decorative. The form should have gone into the amendment's current ledger, stacked in strict chronological fashion. Instead, I placed it into a slot that was wearing someone else's Tuesday like a borrowed glove. That should have been all. A misplaced form ought to remain a misplaced form and be noted as an error on collateral paper, but the Bureau is fond of habits that leak into reality. The slot I had chosen was next to a stack of notices, marked responsive memories, and directly across from a small cactus someone had once labeled unlikely witness. The rubber stamp that should have read "received" read instead a tiny, hesitant question mark thanks to my smudged press. The paper nestled into place like a sheep among sheep. My sandwich, which had been quietly doing its single sandwich job, cleared its throat. It did this with the soft authority of a thing that had not expected to be asked its past. "I remember being a Tuesday," it said in a voice that tasted faintly of mustard. Food is not supposed to have cognitive recall. This was the sort of rule it'd been raised to trust: bread keeps to itself. But the sandwich was articulate. It was probably the most articulate sandwich I have ever met. I dropped my fork. People in the bullpen looked up as if they'd been hoping for a reason. A woman with a calendar pinned to her sleeve nodded, as though she had once lunch predicted a similar transgression. Owen made a small sound that might have been a laugh or a suppressed cough of delight. Mies. Ledger's fingers, which had been counting paperclips, paused at 14, and she let one fall back into the pile. "August," she said. Her voice was not harsh. It was not the voice of condemnation. It was the voice of someone delivering a diagnosis. "Please go and bring that form here. Now." I moved as if underwater, which is to say with the odd grace of someone whose internal metronome is still set to new. I retrieved Form 42B from the rail. It lay there like any other paper except for the faint staccato question mark impressed on the corner. Behind me the office clock gave a sound like a throat clearing, and then, for a single, suspicious second, ticked backward. Nobody panicked. At the bureau, that would have been dramatic. Instead, people adjusted their tea and consulted their own sticky notes. The hum of legal photocopiers resumed as if nothing odd had happened at all. I brought the form to Mies, Ledger's desk, and offered it like an offering. She examined it as if it were an animal that might have ingested a forbidden thing. She smelled like citrus sanitizer and ledger dust, and when she spoke she did it slowly so I could follow the syllables like steps down a staircase. "This stamp," she said, pointing at the question-marked corner, "is wrong." Her finger made a small, precise motion, and the smudge of ink seemed to shiver under inspection. "But misfiling is not a mortal sin. It is a clerical misdemeanor. We correct. We file an amendment. We make a note to be more careful with the press." She reached under her desk and produced a small, flat tin with 3 stamps: "Received, corrected," and the bureau's emblem, a seal that showed a hand gently placing a paper moth into a file. "You will fill out a notation," she said, and then, as if to remind me that the world had not collapsed into legalese, her eyes softened just enough to be dangerous. "We will do it before lunch." It was the way she set the deadline that made me understand the gravity. There is ordinary time, and there is bureau time. And lunch was the hinge on which the world closed. I believe my hands may have been shaking. I filled out the notation. I wrote in neat, anxious letters. I told myself the stories I tell now, that a misfile was typical human error, that errors exist to be corrected, that the world was not a precarious thing balanced on the tip of a smudged stamp. When I presented the note, Mies Ledger folded it and tucked it away, not like a secret, but like a scheduled appointment. Around us, the bullpen continued. Someone hummed a bureaucratic jingle, an old tune about signatures and the sanctity of glue, and I found myself humming along because it seemed the sort of survival skill that should be practiced. My sandwich, meanwhile, returned to being a sandwich, but with an air of someone who had an interesting anecdote to file under, maybe. I do not know if that made me more or less uncomfortable. Owen clapped me once on the shoulder in a way that was supposed to be reassuring, and that, with the gentlest of pressures, felt a little like steering. "We make mistakes," he observed. "The important thing is not to make them worse. Also, bring pastries to the file sprite if you ever meet one. Tough crowd, excellent reviewers." His smile was the sort that suggested he had once bribed a paper sprite with a croissant and received in return a marginal annotation that changed a day's weather in a small town. I tried to be useful for the rest of the morning. I corrected a misprinted memo salutation, reaffixed a "Do Not Archive" label to a folder that had a contradictory emotional attachment, and learned that the post-it note system here was less a system and more a delicate ecology. Each correction was a tiny ritual: stamp, breathe, sign, leave a small note addressed to the stapler in the drawer marked "Possibly Apologize." I found I apologized to inanimate objects with a speed I had not anticipated. By 11:50 the office had accumulated a hush the way a library accumulates a dust mote, slowly and with the certainty of gravity. People put down their phones. A kettle somewhere began to whistle, and then had sense enough to stop. I could feel the noon hinge approaching the way you feel a train when you are standing on a platform, and the metal under your feet seems to lean forward. Lunch was not a moment here so much as a punctuation, a terrible, necessary comma after a long, confusing sentence. I sat at my desk and stared at the rail where the form had been misfiled. The bureaucratic jingle had evolved into a melody that felt like the office's collective heartbeat. The smell of toner was thicker now, as if concentration had a scent. Ms. Ledger had gone back to her counting. She paused in such a way that I thought she might be listening to something none of us could yet hear. She looked briefly at me, and in that look there was no blame, only the cautious trust of someone who has let a trainee staple a metaphor in the past and found that life remained stubbornly absurd. At 11:57 my sandwich, perhaps emboldened by my nervous twiddling, offered a suggestion. "If we are to be amended," it said softly, "perhaps we might also be made kinder." I nearly dropped it. Around me someone snorted into a napkin and then coughed to hide the amusement. "Mies." Ledger did not look surprised. She took a sip of her ritual tea and exhaled very small, as if she had been holding her breath since morning. There was a small, funny, and terrifying thought that rose in my chest like carbonated sugar. What if some errors did not want to be corrected? What if they were not mistakes at all, but surreptitious innovations waiting to be recognized? I thought of my mother and her neat little boxes of family memories, and of how she had once insisted that photographs be labeled to the precise year. I thought of the lobster doodle on the form, and of the humming of the office like a choir of staplers preparing to bless something. Time, in that room, seemed to fold like the corners of memos, careful, deliberate, always aiming for a neat edge. Outside, the city would be going on with ribbon cuttings and old men feeding pigeons, unaware that somewhere in a building that smelled of toner and distant thunderstorms an intern had made a mistake. I did not feel heroic. I felt like someone who had missed a footnote and now might be asked to write one under pressure. The noon bell began to toll, not with pomp but with a series of small, bureaucratically timed chimes. Each chime made the air thicker. The office shifted as if remembering a long-forgotten posture. Ms. Ledger stood and folded her hands like someone closing a ledger for the night. Owen straightened his tie with the solemnity of someone preparing for a minor ritual. I rubbed my palms together and then realized my hands were still covered in toner dust. I pressed them to my blazer as if the fabric could absorb my panic. When the final chime sounded, there was a small exhale that passed through the bullpen like a page being turned. I felt absurdly and entirely like the protagonist of a story whose ending had not yet been decided. The seal of noon was falling. Somewhere under the floorboards, under the humming vaults, something would check the day's grammar and, if necessary, ask for a correction. It was my form. It was my error. It was my panic. Ms. Ledger looked at me with an expression that could have been pity, appointment, or affection. Those three things are cousins in a place that treats misfortune like a meeting to be scheduled. "Bring your pen, August," she said. "We will speak to the records channel. And if you see any sandwiches with opinions on chronology, do remind them that we aim for continuity but not cruelty." I carried my pen like a talisman and followed her through a corridor that smelled faintly of lemon and old ink. Outside the corridor, the building's windows had started to fog as if some big, invisible kettle were whistling far away. The noon seal was a promise and a threat both. I had made a mistake. It was time to learn what fixing a mistake required, and whether there was room in the ledger for a small kindness, or whether kindness itself was a marginalia that needed archiving. If anyone reading this expects a polished heroism, I can only offer the truth. I was an anxious clerk at a desk big for my shoulders, carrying a sandwich that now had opinions and a form with a smudged question mark. I walked because there was nothing else to do but walk toward the place where the bureau mends its little fractures. I walked and I rehearsed apologies to staplers. I walked because noon was settling like a hand on a book, and because, in a building that treated paperwork as prayer, sometimes prayer looked very much like penning a correction and hoping the world would accept it. We arrived at the record's channel door as the kettle in the bullpen gave a decisive murmur, and the lights hummed at a pitch that sounded, improbably, like a throat clearing to begin an important sentence. I was about to learn whether a misfile was merely a clerical misdemeanor or the beginning of something that might rewrite Tuesday into Thursday. I did not quite know the difference yet. I only knew that the clock had stopped pretending to be linear and that my sandwich had a preference. Mies. Ledger opened the door, and for a second I thought we might find in the next room a kindly committee of clerks waiting with stern gazes and biscuits. Instead we found a wall of filing rails, a catwalk, and a single bright lamp over a desk where the stamps looked like small altars. The record's channel smelled older than the bullpen, as if time had been folded and put on a shelf. "Whatever happens now, Mies," Ledger said softly, and it is worth remembering that she was not speaking to me so much as to the rules we would apply. Remember the forms, remember the stamps, and remember most of all that not every misfile is a war. Some are merely invitations. It was an odd comfort. I smiled in a way that was both a warning and an emergency. The door closed behind us with a small, credentialed click. Noon had arrived, so had the need to fix the thing I had broken, or perhaps to consider whether what I had called a break might be a new addition the world had not yet authorized. There are worse things than starting your bureau career with a mistake. There are much worse things than eating a sandwich that thinks it was once a Tuesday. But there are also responsibilities, and Noon leans toward them like a judge. I set my jaw and opened my pen. The file rail behind me had a small white card that read, "If you must do it gently." The card was anonymous. I like to imagine someone had placed it there for me. I think, if I am honest, that it was for anyone who might one day misplace a day and have to bring it home before the city noticed. We had minutes. The day had teeth. I took a breath as if inhaling the patience of 1,000 clerks. And then I began to write the notation that would mark the misfile and begin the negotiation between order and the small, stubborn delights that sometimes disguise themselves as mistakes. I do not yet know how this will end. The ledger is patient, but deadlines are not. The next moments will ask me to be both precise and imaginative, to use my training and my apology, to weigh whether the world wants everything returned exactly as it was, or whether a few small, happier errors might be allowed to stay. I held the pen like an oar. I signed my name as if on a promise and stepped into the morning's catastrophe with my sleeves rolled up and a sandwich in my bag that had opinions. If the bureau is a ritual composed of forms and tea, and the occasional tasteful panic, then consider this my first formal offering. I had not expected, on my second week in the office, to be a bystander at a municipal spectacle in which a hat did something with claws. I had expected, in the professional and perhaps dull way I had been raised, that a misfile would cause a panic in the form of an email chain or, if we were strikingly unlucky, a mild reprimand. I had not expected a crustacean. We were an hour from lunch, and the square had the waxy, expectant sheen of a crowd about to be told that public work had been done well. There were bunting and a red ribbon and a praiseworthy sentence about new sidewalks. There was an MC's voice too bright, too practiced, and a ceremonial pair of scissors so gleaming it seemed to judge the sun. Mayor R. Clive Hargreaves stood on a small wooden dais, the sort of dais that thrives on applause and tax assessments. He was exactly the sort of man who wore hats with the confidence of someone who had never once misfiled a thing in his life. His hat had been respectable wool, sensible band, a feather of carefully curated distinction. I remember the feather because that is how the human mind tells itself that a small, respectable object once existed, by its best adornment. Then, for a breath, the feather considered its options, and the hat performed a very small metamorphosis. The brim folded like a polite smile. The band peeled back like an envelope being opened. A ruby and two jointed claws emerged where a hat's dignity should have been. The mayor did not scream. The lobster did not either. The crowd made noises that were half laughter, half rehearsal for alarm. I stood near a woman from the municipal press office who had, until that second, looked like a person whose entire job consisted of making steady truths look tidy. Her jaw went to work in small, strategic motions. I felt my own jaw do the opposite, a nervous, unhelpful lack of control. I felt my blazer, which was still, at that point, 2 sizes too large, as if I were wearing someone else's apology. Somewhere in my pocket my hands found a scrap of Form 42B. The very form I had been politely assured was banal by Owen the first day. He told me how to hold a hole punch like it was a wand. I had been told to file Form 42B into the Tuesday folder. I had filed it into last Thursday's. Filing is a strange, dangerous intimacy. You place a representation of a moment into a place in the archive, and here the archive reciprocates. Things in the world like to be where they're told to be. I knew, in the biological way we know our shoes are on the wrong feet, the moment the lobster appeared. That knowledge is the kind that expands quietly into the ribs, a slow, particular panic that is equal parts embarrassment and the smell of toner at 2 in the morning. I hummed a bureaucratic jingle, something I had taken to doing when my hands trembled and it sounded like a fax machine trying to sing. "Is that a lobster?" someone said, and it was the kindest phrasing for a delicate domestic miracle gone wrong. "Captain, please maintain decorum," said the MC, who was in possession of a face like a teabag, no expression, but full of something tannic. Meanwhile, a press photographer discovered that his camera had a lens for surreal municipal costume events and proceeded to take a dozen ethically suspect close-ups. The mayor, who later would be described in careful internal documents as briefly accompanied by a decently mannered crustacean, treated it as an occupational hazard. He addressed it as one might a well-dressed constituent. "Come now," he said, because mayors never know what else to say. The lobster adjusted its own spectacles, some small irony of the universe, and pinched the mayor's hat band with what can only be called politeness. It produced a sound like a small, measured applause. By the time the ribbon was cut, the bureau's drab little vans had already been noted by someone in the second row. They are not marked in any official way that would betray their office to a layperson. They merely look like dark rectangles that have been informed by a particular kind of worry. I heard, later, that a citizen with a talent for noticing unusual municipal transport called it into a municipal helpline which, in turn, had a sequence of buttons labeled with different intensities of oddness. Back at the bureau, we did the thing we do. We began to file it. I had pictured, before this career, filing as the end of a process. You put something in a folder, you press a stamp, you forget it. Filing at the bureau is the opposite. Filing is a ceremony you perform to coax the world back into remembering how it should be. We are less a set of clerks than midwives of sequence. We lay tender hands on the world's ribs, and if we are lucky, it settles back down into comfortable breath, me's. Ledger arrived at the square with the sort of speed only people who have a ledger literally stitched into their coat can achieve. She carried herself like a person who had once, for unknown reasons, catalogued a minor miracle and learned to be cryptic about it. Her pockets were full of stamps and talismans. When she walked by me, the air smelled briefly of pastry, and an old redaction grew odd and immediately grounding. August, she said, which felt like a formal summons. Her voice was the sound offices make when they excavate hard decisions from a folder, steady, patient, and somehow reproachful without being unkind. You were at the municipal square. Yes, I said, because the truth had a more complicated shape in my throat. I was there when the mayor's hat, the sentence drooped under its own ridiculousness. A lobster was peeking politely at a string of bunting. This sort of anomaly is not purely aesthetic, Ms. Ledger said. Hats turning into crustaceans is, technically, a misdemeanor of continuity. It may look charming. Charm and continuity do not keep the same hours. Owen arrived, lugging a satchel that made him look like a caricature of every good mentor who had ever been unpunctual. He made a joke about civic mascots and crustacean diplomacy, the kind of joke intended to humanize cheesecake of panic, he said, while passing me a small paper cup of something that might have been coffee and might have been hope. Make an incident report. Be sincere. The lobster likes to be apologized to. It is not the lobster I worry about, Ms. Ledger said. It is the timing. Timing is everything, I said, and sounded like a probable poster child for anxiety camp. Inside the bureau, they mounted the response with the calm efficiency of people who have long ago accepted that the public record will be a strange place. Forms were produced, stamped, and stacked the way a battalion stacks helmets. Registrar Ami, who is small but terrible with a stamp in the best possible way, organized the incident report like she was composing a hymn. She peered at my name on a preliminary statement and smiled in the way of someone who collects secrets inside a Rolodex. You have to describe it plainly, she told me. No flourish. We will supply the flourish where needed. What if the flourish is better than the plainness? I asked stupidly. It landed in the room like a raspberry of fear. Then we file the flourish in the maybe box, she said, as if we kept our better instincts on a separate shelf, like emergency chocolate. In the holding area where we kept stray anomalies, the mayor's lobster had been given a cardboard box which someone, in a fit of corporate tenderness, had stamped temporary companion. A perliassen, whose palms were still the color of someone who touched very official paper a lot, was gently explaining to the lobster that this was not its permanent residence. The lobster clicked its claws against the corrugated floor, in what I would describe as a ladylike penitence. We treat the creatures with dignity, Ms. Ledger murmured. It is best for public confidence. The newspaper feeds called it the lobster in the hat and ran it with a half-hearted pun intended to soften panic. They do not know, those people, that there is always a moment when an anomaly looks adorable before it takes up residence in someone's memory and decides that it likes the furniture. Someone suggested we release the lobster back to the square with a press release that made it sound like a planned performance art piece. Ms. Ledger, who knows too well the long tail of performative eccentricity, said no. To banalize an anomaly is to train the public to expect it, and expectation is a dangerous bedfellow for reality. Lunch seals things, she said beneath a humming fluorescent light, as if telling me an important bedtime story. If we treat it with the right forms and a decent apology, if Registrar Amy processes the incident, and if the mayor signs this particular attestation to accept responsibility for the public distress, then it will usually be one of those charming anomalies that people tell jokes about, and nothing worse. But if we do not, if the filing is late, if the ink is smudged, if the signature is insincere, then sometimes something like this chooses a lodger and begins to rearrange. I misfiled Form 42B, I said. I didn't have to say which way. Misfiled is a small, brittle admission, Ms. Ledger's face, which can be read like a ledger if you would learn its esoteric symbols, softened in a fraction of an inch. Then we will work twice as hard. There will be forms, there will be apologies, there will be a lot of artful stamping. But she pointed a finger that had once, I am fairly sure, been used to conduct a choir of signatures will learn what is more important than perfect order. And that is the way we talk to people when we have squeezed their day into our file boxes. We keep compassion in our margins. Compassion in margins, the phrase settled like a post-it on my forehead. I had been raised in a town that applauded tidy lists. The bureau, I was learning with a shiver, applauded tidy hearts. We processed an incident report. Registrar Amy's stamp had the firmness of a judge and the tenderness of a grandmother. We wrote that the mayor's hat had undergone a temporary morphological reassignment, consistent with non-destructive whimsicality, and recommended a remedial attestation to be signed by the mayor with a provision for the lobster's temporary companionship, if that was desired by the Municipal Arts Council. Outside, the square continued to be a square because, at that hour, most things insist on maintaining their roles. But the lobster and the mayor were now a matter of record. The bureaucracy had begun to speak back to the street. We had not yet sealed the day's continuity. That would come at lunch. The city's public relations office insisted on a press briefing for 2, and the lobster, bless it, clicked its claws when cameras turned to it like a very small, liberated man of war. On my way back to the bureau, someone from the municipal office sent a message asking, in all seriousness, whether the lobster required a parking permit. We replied with an attestation format and a field for notes on the subject's dietary restrictions. It is a strange thing to be culpable for an amusing disaster. The amusement is balm, the culpability is a splinter. I placed my palm over my blazer and felt the odd, real creature of regret. But there was also, under that prick, a kind of electricity I had not felt in my tidy childhood. The knowledge that simple rules, lovingly applied, will not necessarily keep the world hospitable. By the time the lunch bells began their ritual dinging tiny, officious things that sound like a stamp's exhale, the mayor had signed a suitable apology and an agreement for the lobster's temporary, compassionate placement. The incident report was stamped. The prayer-liaison had prepared a script that called the occurrence an endearing civic curiosity, and Mies. Ledger had given me a look that promised both instruction and future grading. "Do your forms properly," she said, without malice, "and learn the sound of a good stamp. It is like a handshake." I washed my hands in the tiny bathroom and found, in the faint mirror, a face that had acquired a new kind of attention. I had not fixed the misfile yet. The lobster had not yet determined whether it liked the town. The world had not yet chosen whether to forgive the error or to spend the next week inventing more elaborate puns. I had a sandwich in my bag that insisted quite loudly that it remembered being someone else for a moment that morning. I am not proud. I apologized to it and indexed the apology under maybe. We filed, we stamped, we apologized. The mayor's lobster-turned hat clicked politely in its box. The public would laugh. Children would ask for lobster hats at birthday parties. The city would have an anecdote to sprinkle into dull council meetings for many years to come. And yet, as Mies, Ledger had said, timing is everything. When lunch approached, the building would seal certain missteps into sweet, manageable anecdotes. If the forms were wrong, the ink smudged, the timing off. Then small errors could accrete into habits, and habits could become a kind of map that no one had asked for. I began to understand in a slow, catastrophic way that a misplaced form is not merely paperwork. It is the hinges of a tiny, living world. The lobster in the mayor's hat was a joke, and it was also an omen. It pinched me gently with its little claw of consequence. And I, who had come to the bureau to learn the right way to hold a hole punch and to keep tidy schedules from my childhood, found myself at the edge of an education in what the office had always taught but never seemed to write down, that order is an art. And that art sometimes needs small, careful mistakes to look like life. We returned to files. We prepared for noon. I stamped a form with a hand that was a little steadier. Outside, somewhere, the mayor adjusted his lobster and found, to his surprise, that it was unusually good at nodding when people told jokes. Inside, Mies. Ledger made a note in a ledger pocket that I could not see. Owen winked at me and said, "Keep your eyes open, Finch. The sandwiches have long memories." The day, it seemed to me in that small, stamped moment, had not decided whether to forgive my misfile yet. But it had decided that it liked having a lobster on its hat, for reasons neither of us could entirely explain. And that I understood then with the sudden, precise knowledge of someone who has misplaced a weekday and is trying to put it back, is a problem the Bureau exists to solve. By the time I returned to my little desk, the incident had been filed, the mayor had been mollified, and the lobster had been assured of temporary shelter. But the misfile was no longer a private embarrassment. It had left a smear in the margins. The Bureau had catalogued it. I put a post-it on my screen that read, "Check Tuesday, Thursday alignment, learn stamps, do not panic." I taped the post-it under a small, hopeful bracket. Lunch would come, and with lunch would come a ceiling. The thought comforted me and terrified me in equal measure. Somewhere between my sandwich and the mayor's lobster, a choice was being made about what the city could get away with and what it could not. I was, by then, painfully aware that the wrong choice held a certain wild appeal, perfect calendars, erasing every awkwardness, every small kindness that had ever been born of mistake. I had already seen, in my life, enough tidy safety to know how sterile it can feel. So we prepared paperwork and apologies and a press release with an approved tone of gentle amusement. We trained our stamps like placid animals. I filed a small confession under errors intern and circled it twice for emphasis. The lobster, somewhere in its temporary companion box, clicked a little to itself and perhaps, if you believed such things, thanked the world for finding it interesting enough to keep. And when the noon bells would ring in a few hours, something would be sealed. Whether that something would be exactly what it had been before my finger slipped in the file drawer, I did not yet know. But I did know this: the world would not be quite as simple as it had been that morning. And if that was a crime, it was perhaps one I was beginning to accept. A lobster cannot, I have decided, be hurried. It must be invited into grace one polite pinch at a time. The city would learn to live with a small crustacean companion, or it would do the more exhausting thing and demand an exact restoration. Either way, my misfile had made a sizable audible ripple, and ripples in the Bureau are the thing we spend our days trying to translate back into sentences. We are translators of the world's accidents, converting them into something a ledger can keep and a public can understand. That is our trade. That is our ritual. That is the manner in which we try every day to make apology and order sit at the same table and have tea. At the moment the chapter of the morning closed, I had a new understanding of what Ms. Ledger meant when she said that lunch seals things. I had empathy for the lobster. I had a post-it. And for the first time since I had put the world into that wrong folder, I felt like someone whose hands might, eventually, steady sufficiently to keep a small, human kind of order. But the day was not over. The misfile had shown teeth. It had also shown claw. And somewhere in the stacks of the Bureau, the paperwork for Tuesday and last Thursday was still in the wrong boxes, breathing the same air and getting ever so slightly friendlier with chaos. Lunch would tell us what kind of friends they would become. I untied the ribbon on my sandwich and, for no good reason, apologized to it. It remembered being someone else. The lobster, on the other side of the city, clicked once more as if in agreement. And the clock in the Bureau, which had been keeping very proper time so far, hiccuped and took 3 short, impossible steps backward, as if checking a margin it had missed. The bell for noon had not yet rung, but the clock had begun to count possibilities. We all looked up. That was the sound of the misfile beginning to care.